become the person others rely on. Practical methods for building trust at work and home. Written and narrated by MSE Boost. Most people think they're reliable. They would describe themselves as someone who follows through, keeps promises, and shows up when it counts. And yet, the evidence tells a different story. Missed deadlines pile up. Return phone calls happen days late or not at all. Small promises, the kind that seem forgettable, slip through the cracks with alarming regularity. The gap between self-perception and actual behavior is where reliability goes to die. Here's what makes this particularly troubling. The people around you have already noticed. They've adjusted their expectations accordingly. They've stopped asking you for certain things. They've built workarounds into their own lives to compensate for the commitments you've dropped. None of this happens with fanfare or confrontation. It happens silently, incrementally, and the result is a quiet erosion of something you may not even realize you've lost. Chapter 1. What reliability actually means. Reliability isn't complicated, but it is demanding. The concept can be distilled into 3 straightforward pillars: doing what you said you would do, doing it when you said you would do it, and doing it how you said you would do it. That's the entire framework. No elaborate theory required. When someone tells you they'll send a document by Thursday morning, and they send it Thursday morning, and the document contains what they described, that person has demonstrated reliability. When any of those 3 elements breaks down, trust takes a hit. Sometimes a small hit, sometimes a significant one. But the hit always lands. The first pillar, doing what you said, seems almost too obvious to mention. Of course you should do what you committed to doing. But obvious isn't the same as easy, and easy isn't the same as automatic. Consider how often commitments get modified in subtle ways. You agreed to review a friend's business plan, but you skimmed it instead of reading carefully. You said you'd pick up groceries, but you forgot 2 items on the list. You promised to be at the event, but you left early. Technically, you showed up. Technically, you participated. But the full commitment wasn't honored, and the person on the receiving end noticed, even if they didn't say anything. The second pillar, when you said, carries enormous weight because timing often matters more than the action itself. Information delivered a day late might be worthless. Help that arrives after the crisis has passed isn't really help at all. A birthday card that shows up a week after the birthday is a different kind of message than intended. When people commit to a timeline and then miss it, they frequently underestimate the downstream consequences. Their lateness isn't just an inconvenience. It forces others to scramble, adjust, or abandon their own plans. The ripple effects multiply in ways the late party never sees. The third pillar, how you said, addresses quality and manner. You agreed to help someone move, but you complained the entire time. You completed the project, but you cut corners that will create problems later. You attended the dinner, but you spent most of it looking at your phone. The technical requirements were met, but the spirit of the commitment was violated. This pillar is where reliability becomes something more than mechanical compliance. It's where dependability transforms into genuine trustworthiness. Why do so many people overestimate their own dependability? The answer involves several psychological blind spots that operate continuously and unconsciously. Human memory is generous to the self. We recall our successes more vividly than our failures. That time you stayed late to help a colleague finish a presentation? Crystal clear in your mind. Those 3 occasions last month when you said you'd call someone back and didn't? Already fading. This isn't dishonesty. It's how memory actually works. The brain privileges information that supports a positive self-image and quietly discards evidence to the contrary. There's also the matter of intentions versus outcomes. When you fail to follow through on something, you have access to all the reasons why. You know about the unexpected work crisis, the car trouble, the sleepless night with a sick child. These explanations feel meaningful because they are meaningful to you. But the person waiting on your commitment doesn't experience your reasons. They experience only the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. You judge yourself by your intentions. Others judge you by your actions. This asymmetry creates a persistent disconnect between how reliable you believe you are and how reliable you actually appear. A third factor involves the attention paid to big moments versus small ones. Most people rise to significant occasions. When the stakes are visible and the commitment is explicit, follow-through rates improve dramatically. But reliability isn't primarily tested during major events. It's tested in the accumulated weight of minor promises. Returning an email, showing up on time for coffee, remembering to bring something you said you'd bring. These small moments don't feel important individually, but collectively, they form the foundation of how others perceive your dependability. And here's the problem. Small failures are easy to dismiss, rationalize, or forget entirely. Their individual insignificance makes them feel exempt from the reliability equation. They aren't. There's an important distinction worth examining: the difference between being liked and being relied upon. These two qualities are related, but not identical, and confusing them creates real problems. Likable people are pleasant to be around. They're warm, engaging, and socially skilled. They make others feel comfortable and valued. These are genuine strengths, and they matter in building relationships. But likability alone doesn't produce trust in someone's dependability. You might enjoy spending time with a friend who's consistently late, frequently cancels plans, and routinely forgets commitments. You like them. You may even love them. But when something important needs to happen, you don't call that person. You call the friend, who might be less charming but will absolutely show up when they say they will. Organizations experience this same dynamic. The coworker everyone enjoys having lunch with isn't necessarily the coworker everyone wants on their project team. The manager who gives inspiring speeches isn't necessarily the manager whose commitments carry weight. Likability opens doors. Reliability keeps them open. Both qualities matter, but they serve different functions and shouldn't be conflated. Some people have built entire identities around being likable while neglecting the harder work of being dependable. They've learned that charm can smooth over failures, that apologies delivered with warmth are readily accepted, that social grace buys repeated chances, and it does, for a while. But there's a ceiling on this strategy. Over time, patterns become visible, repeated failures accumulate. The goodwill generated by likability gets depleted by unreliability. What remains is a reputation that's pleasant but insubstantial. The reverse situation also exists. People who are highly reliable but not particularly warm. They do exactly what they commit to doing, precisely when they said they'd do it, in exactly the manner described. But they're not much fun. They don't generate the social energy that likable people produce. Their dependability is unquestionable, but their company isn't actively sought. This is a more sustainable position than being likable but unreliable, but it's still incomplete. The goal isn't to choose between these qualities. It's to develop both while recognizing that reliability requires specific, deliberate attention. A critical shift happens when you start thinking about reliability as a skill rather than a fixed personality trait. If dependability is a trait, something you either have or don't have, then improvement isn't really possible. Unreliable people are simply being who they are. They can try harder, feel guilty, make promises to do better, but fundamental change isn't on the table. This framing is comforting in a strange way. It removes responsibility. It explains failure without requiring change. But reliability isn't like eye color or height. It's a cluster of behaviors, habits, and systems that can be learned, practiced, and strengthened over time. The person who constantly misses deadlines isn't expressing an immutable characteristic. They're demonstrating a gap in their commitment management skills. The person who forgets promises hasn't revealed a permanent flaw. They've shown that their tracking systems need work. The person whose follow-through deteriorates under stress isn't fundamentally flawed. They need better protocols for maintaining consistency when pressure increases. This reframe matters because it makes improvement possible and makes the lack of improvement a choice. Once you recognize that reliability is learnable, staying unreliable becomes a decision rather than a fate. You can develop better systems for tracking commitments. You can learn language patterns that signal genuine intent. You can build habits that support follow-through, even when motivation flags. None of this is mysterious. None of it requires unusual talent. It requires recognition, effort, and sustained attention. Thinking of reliability as a skill also helps with the inevitable failures. Skills have learning curves. No one expects a beginner pianist to perform flawlessly. Mistakes are part of development. The same applies to building dependability. You will drop commitments. You will miss deadlines. You will fall short of the standard you're trying to reach. The difference between treating reliability as a trait versus a skill lies in what happens next. If it's a trait, failure confirms an identity. I'm just not dependable. If it's a skill, failure becomes information. That approach didn't work. What adjustments should I make? Small commitments carry hidden costs when broken. This is one of the least understood aspects of reliability, and it deserves careful attention. When you miss a major commitment, the consequences are obvious. Break a significant promise, and there's typically a direct conversation about it. Feelings are expressed. Apologies are offered. The failure is visible to everyone involved, including you. This visibility, painful as it is, creates an opportunity for repair. Small commitments don't work this way. Miss a minor promise and there's usually no conversation at all. The other person notices, adjusts their expectations slightly, and moves on. No confrontation occurs, no direct feedback arrives. You may not even realize you failed. And yet, something has shifted. The mental model that person holds of you has been updated. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. Each small failure adds another data point. Over time, these accumulated micro-failures reshape how you're perceived, all without a single word being spoken about it. Consider the mathematics of this. A major failure might happen once or twice a year. Small failures can happen daily. Which has more cumulative impact? The daily weight of minor lapses, the unreturned messages, the forgotten details, the casual commitments made without thought often outweighs the occasional significant breach. Death by 1,000 cuts is real in the domain of reliability. There's another dimension to this. Small commitments are where habits live. Major commitments receive conscious attention and deliberate effort. You gear up for them. You put them on calendars. You set reminders. But small promises often bypass these systems entirely. They're made casually and managed or mismanaged habitually. Your behavior around small commitments reveals your default settings, the automatic patterns that operate when you're not actively trying. If those defaults are unreliable, no amount of effort on big occasions will fully compensate. This is why the path to becoming genuinely dependable runs through the territory of small promises. Master the minor commitments, and the major ones become much easier. Let the minor ones slide, and you'll find yourself constantly playing catch-up on the bigger ones, while your baseline reputation erodes. Reliability also requires understanding what you're actually promising. Vague commitments create ambiguity about what success looks like. I'll try to make it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. I'll get back to you soon could mean hours or weeks depending on interpretation. I'll help with that leaves open questions about scope, timing, and manner. When commitments lack specificity, both parties are operating with different mental pictures of what was agreed to. This mismatch guarantees disappointment even when everyone acts in good faith. Clear commitments specify the action, the timeline, and any relevant conditions. They sound like, I'll send you the document by Thursday at noon. I'll be there at 7 p.m. I'll review the first 3 sections and give you detailed notes by the weekend. Precision removes ambiguity and creates a shared understanding that can actually be met. This doesn't mean every interaction needs legal-level specificity. Casual relationships can tolerate more looseness than professional ones. But the principle holds regardless of context. Clearer commitments are easier to keep and easier to be held accountable for. When you notice yourself using vague language around promises, it's worth asking whether that vagueness is serving you or undermining you. Often, it's a form of self-protection, leaving room to disappoint without technically having broken a promise. This protection is expensive. It trades short-term flexibility for long-term credibility. Before moving forward, it's useful to establish an honest baseline, not an optimistic one, not the version of yourself you'd like to believe in, the actual current state of your reliability. Think about the last month. How many times did you say you would do something and then not do it? Include everything, the major commitments and the minor ones, the professional obligations and the personal promises, the explicit agreements and the implied ones. Don't round down. Don't excuse the failures that had good reasons behind them. Just count. How many times were you late? Late to meetings, late with deliverables, late returning communications, late showing up to events. Again, count honestly. The small delays matter as much as the significant ones. When you did complete commitments, how often did the quality match what you'd indicated? How many times did you technically fulfill a promise while falling short of its spirit? Think about the last few people who asked you to do something. Do you know, right now, what you owe them and when? Could you list those commitments without checking notes or messages? If someone asked those people whether you're reliable, what would they honestly say? Not politely, but honestly. These questions aren't comfortable, and they're not meant to be. They're meant to produce an accurate picture. Growth starts from wherever you actually are, not from wherever you wish you were. If the baseline reveals significant gaps between your self-perception and your actual behavior, that's useful information. It defines the work ahead. Reliability isn't glamorous. It doesn't generate the excitement that other personal qualities produce. No one throws parties for people who simply do what they said they would do. There's no drama in consistent follow-through, no story arc in dependable behavior. But this lack of glamour is precisely what makes reliability so powerful. It operates in the background, quietly building something that flashier qualities cannot. A reputation that precedes you, a track record that speaks for itself, and relationships built on solid ground rather than shifting sand. The chapters that follow will address the practical mechanics, how to make commitments you can keep, how to maintain consistency when circumstances become difficult, how to recover when you fall short. But all of that builds on the foundation established here. A clear understanding of what reliability actually means, an honest assessment of where you currently stand, and the recognition that dependability is a skill you can develop rather than a trait you're either born with or not. The people who become genuinely relied upon aren't special. They don't possess unusual willpower or superior character. They've simply learned to manage their commitments with intention rather than habit, to treat small promises with the same seriousness as large ones, and to prioritize follow-through even when it's inconvenient. These are learnable behaviors. The choice to learn them is yours. Chapter 2. How to make and keep commitments. The moment you say yes to something, you've made a withdrawal from a finite account. That account holds your time, your energy, your attention, and your credibility. Every commitment costs something from this account, whether you consciously recognize the transaction or not. Most people spend from this account carelessly, saying yes out of reflex, optimism, or social pressure, and then wonder why they're perpetually overdrawn. Unreliability rarely begins with bad intentions. It begins with bad math. People commit to more than they can actually deliver, using a calculation based on best-case scenarios, assuming nothing will go wrong, no unexpected demands will arise, and their future selves will somehow have more capacity than their present selves. This math is always wrong. And when the inevitable shortfall arrives, something has to give. Deadlines slip, quality suffers, promises get quietly broken or awkwardly renegotiated. The pattern repeats because the underlying problem, committing without realistic assessment, never gets addressed. What separates consistently reliable people from everyone else isn't superior willpower or more hours in the day. It's a fundamentally different approach to how commitments get made in the first place. They've learned to treat every yes as a serious decision rather than a casual response. They've developed habits and systems that prevent overcommitment before it happens. They understand that protecting their reliability sometimes means disappointing people in the short term to avoid failing them in the long term. Before agreeing to anything, reliable people run a quick internal evaluation. This isn't complicated or time-consuming, but it is deliberate. They ask themselves a series of questions that most people skip entirely. The first question is simple. What exactly am I agreeing to? This sounds obvious, but vague commitments are epidemic. Someone asks for help with a project, and you agree without clarifying what help means, how much time it requires, or what the expected outcome looks like. Someone mentions needing something soon, and you nod along without establishing whether soon means tomorrow or next month. The failure to specify creates a gap between what you think you've promised and what the other person believes you've promised. That gap is where reliability goes to die. Getting specific requires asking clarifying questions before committing, not after. What does done look like? When does this need to happen? What resources or information will I need? How much of my time will this realistically take? These questions might feel awkward in the moment, especially when someone needs a quick answer or when social pressure pushes toward immediate agreement. But the momentary awkwardness of clarification is nothing compared to the lasting damage of a broken or poorly fulfilled commitment. The second question is, do I actually have the capacity to do this? Not in an ideal world where nothing else demands your attention. Not in a fantasy scenario where your future self is more disciplined and less busy than your current self. Right now, with everything else already on your plate, can you genuinely deliver what's being asked? Answering this honestly requires knowing what you've already committed to. Most people don't. They carry around a vague sense of being busy without a clear inventory of their existing obligations. This vagueness enables overcommitment because there's no concrete evidence contradicting the optimistic belief that things will somehow work out. Reliable people maintain awareness of their current commitments, not necessarily through elaborate systems, but through some method of tracking what they owe and when they owe it. The third question is, am I willing to prioritize this appropriately? Capacity isn't just about time. It's about where a commitment falls in your hierarchy of obligations. If you agree to something but consistently rank it below other demands, you'll either deliver late, deliver poorly, or not deliver at all. Being honest with yourself about prioritization means acknowledging that some requests, however reasonable or well-intentioned, simply won't receive the attention they deserve given everything else competing for your focus. The language you use when making commitments carries enormous weight. Certain phrases signal reliability, others signal its opposite. Learning to hear the difference, and to speak accordingly, is a practical skill that directly impacts how others perceive your dependability. "I'll try" is the most dangerous phrase in the English language when it comes to reliability. It sounds reasonable. It sounds modest. It sounds like you're making an effort. But what "I'll try" actually communicates is, I'm not committing to this. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, I've already given myself an out. People who hear "I'll try" adjust their expectations accordingly. They make backup plans. They don't fully count on you. And they're wise to do so, because "I'll try" is almost never followed by the same level of effort and follow-through that "I will" produces. A straightforward "no" is more trustworthy than a hedged "I'll try." When you decline something clearly, the other person can make alternative arrangements. They're not left in limbo, half expecting your help while half suspecting it won't materialize. A clean "no" respects their time and their planning. It also protects your reputation. The person who says no when they can't deliver is far more reliable than the person who says maybe and then disappoints. "I should be able to" falls into the same trap as "I'll try." It's commitment language with an escape hatch built in. The word "should" does a lot of heavy lifting here, providing plausible deniability for failure while sounding superficially positive. When you catch yourself reaching for "should," it's a signal that you're not actually confident in your ability to deliver. Honor that signal. Either investigate until you can commit with confidence, or decline. Yes, without qualifications is what reliable people aim for, but only when they genuinely mean it. A yes should indicate that you understand what you're agreeing to, that you have the capacity to deliver, and that you're willing to prioritize appropriately. When you say yes with these conditions met, you're making a real commitment. When you say yes without them, you're making a prediction that you hope will come true. Predictions have a way of not coming true. Yes, and here's what that will look like is even stronger. This phrase demonstrates that you've thought through the commitment and are prepared to execute. It might sound like, yes, I can review that document. I'll have detailed notes back to you by Friday afternoon. The specificity signals seriousness. It converts a vague agreement into a concrete promise with clear parameters for success. Let me check and get back to you is underutilized and undervalued. There's nothing weak about needing time to assess a request before responding. The pause between request and commitment is where good decisions get made. Reliable people have learned to resist the social pressure for immediate answers when immediate answers aren't warranted. They buy themselves time to evaluate properly, then return with a response they can actually stand behind. Tracking commitments sounds tedious, and for many people, that's enough reason to skip it. But operating without a system for knowing what you owe and when you owe it is like managing money without knowing your account balance. You might get lucky for a while. Eventually, you'll overdraw. The specific method matters less than the consistency of using it. Some people maintain a single list where every commitment gets recorded. Others use calendar blocking to make promises visible as time allocations. Some rely on task management apps. Others use paper notebooks. The tool is secondary. What matters is that every commitment you make gets captured somewhere outside your head, with enough detail to know what success looks like and when it needs to happen. The capture needs to happen immediately. The gap between making a commitment and recording it is where things get lost. You finish a conversation, intend to write down what you agreed to, get distracted by the next thing, and suddenly the promise exists only as a fading memory. Hours later, you might recall that you agreed to something, but not the specifics. Days later, you might not recall at all until the other person follows up and you realize you've dropped it entirely. Building the habit of immediate capture requires treating every commitment as important enough to document. This feels excessive at first. Not every promise seems worthy of writing down. But the small commitments are precisely the ones that slip through the cracks most often. They're easy to make, easy to forget, and easy to rationalize when forgotten. A system that captures everything protects against this selective memory. Regular review is the other half of the equation. A list of commitments does no good if you never look at it. Reliable people build review into their routines, daily, weekly, or both. During review, you're asking, what do I owe? What's coming due? What needs attention today to avoid becoming urgent tomorrow? This proactive scanning prevents the scramble that happens when commitments surface only at the moment of reckoning. When you're uncertain about a commitment, the 24-hour rule provides a useful default. Rather than saying yes or no immediately, you request a day to consider. This pause serves multiple purposes. Time reveals clarity. What seems manageable in the moment of asking may look different after sleeping on it. The enthusiasm or social pressure that pushed toward yes fades, and you can evaluate more objectively. Questions that didn't occur to you during the initial conversation surface. Conflicts with existing commitments become visible. The 24-hour gap isn't about procrastinating a decision. It's about creating space for a better decision. The rule also filters out low-priority requests. If someone isn't willing to wait 24 hours for your response, that tells you something about either the urgency of the request or their respect for your process. Genuinely urgent matters will make their urgency clear and may warrant an immediate response. But most requests aren't actually urgent. They're just presented with urgency because people want quick answers. Distinguishing real urgency from manufactured urgency is a critical skill for protecting your reliability. Using the 24-hour rule consistently trains others to expect it from you. Initially, people might be surprised or even frustrated when you don't answer immediately. Over time, they adjust. They learn that your eventual yes means something because it comes after genuine consideration. They learn that you take commitments seriously enough to evaluate them properly. This reputation benefits you far more than the reputation of being the person who always says yes right away and then frequently fails to deliver. Circumstances change. What seemed possible when you made a commitment may become impossible or significantly more difficult as situations evolve. How you handle these moments determines whether your reliability survives them. Early communication is everything. The moment you realize a commitment is in jeopardy, the other person needs to know. Not when the deadline arrives and you have nothing to deliver. Not when they follow up asking about progress. The instant you recognize a problem, that problem needs to be shared. This goes against every instinct. When things start going wrong, the natural response is to hope they'll turn around. You tell yourself you can still make it work. You avoid the uncomfortable conversation as long as possible, convinced that bringing a solution is better than bringing a problem. But this delay is precisely what destroys trust. The person waiting on your commitment can't adjust their plans based on problems you haven't told them about. By the time you finally acknowledge the issue, their options have narrowed and their frustration has grown. Early communication sounds like, "I wanted to let you know as soon as possible. I'm running into a problem with the project we discussed." Or, "Something has come up that's affecting my ability to deliver what I promised. Can we talk about options?" The specific words matter less than the timing. Saying something when there's still time to adjust is fundamentally different from saying something when the deadline has already passed. The conversation itself should include 3 elements: acknowledgement of the original commitment, honest explanation of what has changed, and proposed path forward. You're not making excuses. You're providing context. You're not asking to be let off the hook. You're offering alternatives. This might be a revised timeline, a reduced scope, or assistance finding someone else who can help. What you're demonstrating is that you take the commitment seriously enough to actively manage its failure rather than passively letting it happen. Repeated renegotiation erodes trust, even when individual instances are handled well. If you're constantly coming back to revise commitments, the pattern itself becomes the problem. People stop believing your initial promises because experience has taught them those promises are merely starting points. Avoiding this requires making fewer commitments in the first place, saying yes only when you have genuine confidence in your ability to deliver. Every promise should include built-in buffer time. This isn't pessimism, it's arithmetic. Consider how long you think something will take. Now consider how often things actually take that long without interruptions, complications, or unforeseen obstacles. If you're being honest, the answer is rarely. The expected time is almost always a best-case estimate, and best cases are exceptions, not rules. Buffer time is the gap between what you believe you need and what you actually promise. If you think you can finish something by Wednesday, commit to Friday. If you think a meeting will run an hour, block an hour and a half. If you estimate a project at 10 hours of work, plan for 15 before quoting a deadline. This buffer serves multiple purposes. It absorbs the unexpected, which will occur. It allows for quality work rather than rushed work. It creates space for the review and refinement that elevates good enough to genuinely good. And when things do go smoothly, you have the pleasant opportunity to deliver early, which enhances your reputation for reliability rather than merely maintaining it. The resistance to buffer time is usually psychological. Longer timelines feel less impressive. Committing to Friday when you think you can finish by Wednesday seems like sandbagging. You want to appear fast, efficient, responsive, but this desire trades real reliability for the appearance of speed. A reputation for being quick evaporates the moment you miss a deadline. A reputation for consistently delivering when promised compounds with every commitment kept. Buffer time also reduces stress. Operating without margin means operating in constant urgency. Every unexpected demand becomes a crisis because there's no slack in the system to absorb it. Every deadline approaches with anxiety because there's no room for error. Building buffer into your commitments is building sustainability into your life. The person who consistently delivers on time without being perpetually overwhelmed has structured their commitments intelligently. Saying no is difficult. It feels like rejection, like letting someone down, like failing to be helpful. These feelings are real, but they're misleading. A well-delivered no often serves everyone better than a poorly executed yes. The discomfort of declining comes partly from treating every no as permanent and absolute. But most no's are actually not this, not now. They're specific to a particular request in a particular moment. You're not declaring yourself unhelpful forever. You're acknowledging that this specific commitment doesn't fit with your current capacity or priorities. Framing no this way, internally and externally, makes it easier to deliver. A useful no includes brief explanation without excessive justification. You don't need to prove that your reasons are valid enough to warrant declining. You don't need to provide a detailed accounting of everything else demanding your time. A simple acknowledgement that you can't take this on right now is sufficient. Over-explaining invites debate about whether your reasons are good enough, and that's not a productive conversation. When possible, a no can include an alternative. This might be a suggestion of someone else who could help, or an offer to revisit the request at a later time, or a willingness to help with a smaller piece of what was asked. Alternatives demonstrate that you're declining the specific commitment, not the relationship. They show good faith and genuine interest in the other person's needs, even when you can't meet them directly. Some requests require an immediate no, because the answer is clearly no, and delay would be unkind. If someone asks you to chair a committee and you know with certainty you won't do it, saying you'll think about it and get back to them is wasting their time and yours. Quick clarity serves everyone, but when genuine uncertainty exists, when you might be able to do something but aren't sure, the 24-hour rule applies. Take the time to evaluate properly rather than defaulting to yes under pressure. The mechanics of commitment, how you evaluate requests, what language you use, how you track promises, when you communicate problems, might seem like operational details. They are. But operational details are where reliability lives. The grand intention to be dependable means nothing without the practical systems that make dependability possible. Building these habits takes time. You won't transform your commitment patterns overnight, and occasional lapses will occur. What changes is the trajectory. Fewer dropped promises, clearer communication, better alignment between what you agree to and what you deliver. Each commitment kept reinforces the patterns that made it possible. Each commitment managed well, even the ones that require renegotiation, builds evidence that you take your promises seriously. Reliability compounds in ways that may not be immediately visible. The person who declines your request today because they're at capacity remembers that you respected their limits rather than pressuring them. The colleague who receives early warning about a delayed deliverable remembers that you communicated proactively rather than leaving them hanging. The friend who gets a specific commitment with a realistic timeline rather than a vague "I'll try" remembers that your word actually means something. Each of these moments deposits into an account that accrues interest over time, building something that can't be manufactured or shortcuts into existence, a genuine reputation for keeping your word. Chapter 3. Staying consistent when it's difficult. Reliability is easy when life cooperates. The real test comes when it doesn't, when deadlines collide, when crises emerge from nowhere, when your energy reserves hit empty, and the commitments keep piling up. This is where most people's dependability falls apart. Not from lack of intention, not from character flaws, from the simple, brutal math of having more demands than resources to meet them. What separates people who maintain their reliability under pressure from those who don't isn't toughness or willpower, it's preparation. They've identified where their consistency tends to break down. They've developed protocols for managing overload before it becomes crisis. They've built systems that hold up when they themselves are struggling. None of this happens by accident. It happens through deliberate attention to the conditions that threaten dependability and equally deliberate construction of defenses against them. This chapter addresses the hardest part of becoming someone others rely on, staying that way when everything conspires against it. The strategies here aren't about perfection. They're about resilience, the ability to maintain reasonable consistency through difficult stretches. and to recover quickly when you fall short. Everyone has specific conditions under which their reliability degrades. These aren't random or unpredictable. They follow patterns that become visible if you look for them. Sleep deprivation compromises some people's follow-through dramatically. Below a certain threshold of rest, their executive function deteriorates, and promises made the day before seem to slip into a fog. Others can function adequately on limited sleep, but fall apart under emotional stress, a conflict with a family member, anxiety about health or money, the lingering weight of a difficult conversation. Some people's reliability breaks down when they're physically ill, even mildly. Others lose their grip on commitments during periods of high novelty, travel, starting a new job, moving to a new home. Professional pressures create their own breakpoints. Major deadlines can consume so much attention that everything outside their orbit gets neglected. Difficult colleagues or tense workplace dynamics drain bandwidth that would otherwise go toward keeping promises. Taking on new responsibilities often correlates with dropping balls on existing ones, as the learning curve for unfamiliar tasks absorbs capacity that was previously available for maintenance. Personal life events trigger reliability failures in patterns that are often predictable in retrospect. Relationship difficulties, new romance, relationship conflict, breakups, redirect focus and energy away from other commitments. Caring for children, aging parents, or sick family members creates unpredictable demands that interrupt the best-laid plans. Even positive events like weddings, graduations, or major purchases can temporarily overwhelm the systems that normally keep someone on track. Knowing your specific breakpoints transforms them from invisible threats into manageable risks. You can't prevent every stressor from occurring, but you can recognize when you're entering conditions that historically compromise your reliability. This recognition is the foundation for everything else in this chapter. Identifying your breakpoints requires honest examination of past failures. Think about the last several times you dropped a commitment, missed a deadline, or delivered something below the standard you'd intended. What else was happening during those periods? What preceded the failure? What conditions were present? Patterns will emerge. Maybe you notice that reliability problems cluster around the end of each quarter when work intensity peaks. Maybe they correlate with visits from extended family. Maybe they follow episodes of poor sleep, or periods when you've said yes to too many social obligations, or times when you've been dealing with a nagging health issue you've been ignoring. Write these patterns down. Create a list of your reliability risk factors, the specific conditions, situations, and states that historically coincide with dropped commitments. This list is personal. What threatens your consistency may have no effect on someone else, and their triggers may leave you unbothered. The goal isn't to identify universal vulnerabilities. It's to identify yours. With this list in hand, you can build early warning awareness. When you notice a risk factor appearing, declining sleep quality, an upcoming high-stress period, emerging conflict in a relationship, you're receiving a signal. Your reliability is under elevated threat. This is the moment to take protective action, rather than waiting until things have already started slipping. When demands exceed capacity, something has to give. The question is whether that something gets chosen deliberately or discovered accidentally. Most people operate without explicit prioritization. Commitments compete for attention on roughly equal footing, and whatever feels most urgent in the moment gets handled first. This approach works adequately when there's enough capacity to meet everything. It fails catastrophically during overload. Without clear priorities, everything suffers partial attention. Deadlines get met through last-minute scrambles that sacrifice quality. Lower priority commitments get dropped not because you decided they were less important, but because they simply fell off the bottom of an overflowing stack. Deliberate triage requires ranking your commitments. Not all promises are equally important. Not all relationships carry equal weight. Not all deadlines have equivalent consequences. Being explicit about these differences allows you to make rational decisions about where limited resources go. Start by listing everything you currently owe, every commitment, every promise, every expectation others have, based on something you've said or agreed to. Include professional obligations and personal ones. Include the major deliverables and the small promises you made in passing. Get everything onto paper or screen where you can see it. Sort this list by consequence of failure. What happens if each commitment goes unmet? Some failures carry severe consequences. Damaged important relationships, lost opportunities, professional repercussions, harm to others. Some carry moderate consequences. Disappointed acquaintances, missed chances that weren't that important anyway, minor embarrassment. Some carry minimal consequences. The other person might not even notice, or would understand completely, or the commitment was soft to begin with. This sorting reveals your true priorities. The commitments with severe failure consequences are non-negotiable. They get your resources first, regardless of what else is happening. The moderate consequence commitments require attention, but can accept some flexibility. The minimal consequence commitments are where you have room to renegotiate, delay, or in extreme cases, drop entirely. This isn't comfortable. Looking at a list of your promises and deciding which ones matter less feels like a betrayal of the people you made them to. But the alternative, pretending everything matters equally and then failing randomly across the board, serves no one. Intentional triage protects your most important commitments by acknowledging that you can't protect everything. Communicating early when you're approaching capacity is a discipline that protects both your reliability and your relationships. Most people wait too long. They hit their limit, start falling behind, and only then begin telling people about the problem. By that point, damage has already occurred. The person expecting your deliverable has already been inconvenienced. The friend counting on your presence has already adjusted their plans, or, worse, been left hanging. Early communication means signaling before you're in crisis. It sounds like, I want to let you know that I'm heading into an unusually demanding period. I'm going to do everything I can to keep my commitments, but I wanted you to be aware in case my response times are slower than usual. Or, my capacity is getting stretched thin right now. If anything starts slipping, I'll let you know immediately, but I wanted to flag it now, so you're not surprised. This kind of proactive transparency accomplishes several things. It gives others the opportunity to adjust their expectations and plans. It demonstrates that you're paying attention and taking your commitments seriously. It creates space for grace when things do get difficult. People respond differently to, I'm overwhelmed and dropped your project, than to, I warned you things were getting tight. And unfortunately, this is one of the casualties. Early communication also creates accountability that can motivate follow-through. Once you've told people that you're stretched thin, you've publicly acknowledged the risk. This awareness often helps you find extra capacity you didn't know you had. The announcement becomes a self-imposed pressure that pushes back against the forces threatening to compromise your reliability. The timing of this communication matters. Signal when you first notice that conditions are becoming challenging, not when things have already deteriorated. The earlier you communicate, the more options everyone has. Waiting until the last minute turns a manageable situation into a crisis. Despite your best efforts, failures will occur. Commitments will be missed. Deadlines will slip. The question isn't whether you'll ever fall short. It's how you recover when you do. Effective recovery begins with prompt acknowledgement. The moment you realize you failed to deliver on a commitment, that failure needs to be owned openly. Not minimized. Not blamed on circumstances. Not wrapped in so many qualifications that the acknowledgement becomes meaningless. Direct, clear ownership. I committed to having this done by Friday. It's Monday and I don't have it. That's my failure. This acknowledgement should reach the affected person immediately. The instinct to delay, to wait until you have the completed deliverable, to hope they haven't noticed yet, to put off the uncomfortable conversation makes everything worse. Every hour of delay is an hour when the other person can't adjust their plans, an hour when your silence looks like either obliviousness or avoidance, an hour when the relationship cost of the failure continues to accrue. After acknowledgement comes explanation without excuse-making. There's a meaningful difference between explaining what happened and making excuses. Explanation provides context that helps the other person understand. The project I thought would take 5 hours turned into 20 when I discovered the underlying data was corrupted. Excuse-making shifts responsibility away from you. It's not really my fault because the data was corrupted. The former preserves your ownership of the failure while adding relevant information. The latter undermines the acknowledgement you just made. Explanation should be brief. Lengthy justification signals defensiveness and can feel like an attempt to talk your way out of responsibility. A sentence or two of context is usually sufficient. The other person doesn't need your complete autobiography of everything that went wrong. They need to know what happened and what you're doing about it. The recovery conversation must include a concrete path forward. What are you going to do now? When will the original commitment be fulfilled? What, if anything, can you offer to compensate for the delay or failure? Coming to this conversation with a plan demonstrates that you're already working on the solution, not just delivering bad news and hoping someone else figures out what happens next. Repeated failures with the same person require additional attention. A single dropped commitment is a mistake. Multiple dropped commitments start to look like a pattern, and patterns are what people use to predict future behavior. When you failed someone more than once, the standard recovery protocol isn't sufficient. The conversation needs to address the pattern, not just the incident. This sounds like, I'm aware that this is the third time I've been late with something I promised you. I understand if your confidence in my reliability has been shaken, and I want to talk about what I can do to rebuild that. This acknowledgement of the pattern is uncomfortable but necessary. Pretending each failure is isolated when the other person is clearly tracking them across time comes across as oblivious or dishonest. Naming the pattern directly shows self-awareness and takes the elephant out of the room. The conversation should then focus on what's going to change. Not vague promises to do better, specific, concrete changes to how you'll handle commitments with this person going forward. Maybe it's committing to smaller deliverables so you can demonstrate reliability on a shorter cycle. Maybe it's building in more buffer time than you normally would. Maybe it's checking in at intermediate milestones rather than only at final deadlines. The specific changes matter less than their specificity and your genuine commitment to implementing them. Following through on these changes with visible consistency is how trust gets rebuilt. You don't repair a pattern of failure with a single success. You repair it with a new pattern, multiple instances of kept commitments that gradually overwrite the record of failures. This takes time. It requires patience. There's no shortcut through it. Personal infrastructure supports reliability the way physical infrastructure supports a city. Without roads, electrical grids, and water systems, cities can't function. Without the personal equivalent, routines, environments, habits, and support systems, individual reliability can't hold up under pressure. Routines reduce the cognitive load of keeping commitments. When checking your obligation list happens at the same time every day, you don't have to remember to do it. It happens automatically. When responding to messages occurs during a dedicated window rather than whenever you think of it, nothing slips through the cracks because you got distracted. When preparing for the next day's commitments is the last thing you do each evening, you arrive at tomorrow already oriented toward what needs to happen. The specific routines matter less than their consistency. Some people review their commitments first thing in the morning. Others do it the night before. Some batch all their communications into a single daily session. Others handle them in multiple short bursts. The method should fit your life and working style. What shouldn't vary is the presence of some systematic approach that doesn't depend on willpower or memory. Physical environment either supports or undermines reliability. A workspace cluttered with reminders of unfinished tasks creates constant low-grade anxiety that makes focused work harder. A calendar system that hides upcoming commitments until they're imminent prevents proactive preparation. A phone that interrupts every few minutes with notifications fractures attention in ways that make follow-through more difficult. Auditing your environment for reliability threats and systematically addressing them is maintenance work that pays dividends. Support systems extend your capacity. The person who tries to handle everything alone has only their own resources to draw on. The person who has built relationships with others who can help, colleagues who can cover, friends who can provide backup, family who can absorb some load, has access to expanded capacity during difficult periods. Building these relationships before you need them is essential. Reaching out for the first time when you're already in crisis rarely works well. Long-term reliability produces compounding returns that may not be visible in the short term. Each commitment kept deposits into a reputational account. The balance of this account determines how much benefit of the doubt you receive when things get difficult. Someone with a long track record of dependability can absorb an occasional failure without lasting damage. People assume it's an exception and extend grace accordingly. Someone without that track record faces immediate credibility damage from the same failure. People assume it's part of a pattern and respond accordingly. This compounding works in both directions. Consistent reliability builds momentum. Each kept commitment makes the next one slightly easier because you've reinforced your own identity as someone who follows through. Your confidence in your own dependability grows, which itself supports further reliability. Others' confidence in you grows as well, which creates positive pressure to maintain the standard you've established. Consistent unreliability also builds momentum in the opposite direction. Each dropped commitment makes the next one slightly easier to drop because you've established a precedent. Your identity as someone who doesn't follow through calcifies. Others' expectations adjust downward, which removes some of the external pressure that might otherwise motivate reliability. Breaking out of this negative spiral requires deliberate effort against your own momentum. The implications are significant. Early investments in reliability pay outsized dividends because they establish the trajectory. Building a reputation for dependability in the early stages of a relationship, job, or project creates a foundation that supports everything that comes after. Neglecting reliability early creates deficits that become increasingly expensive to repair. A danger exists on the other end of the spectrum: rigidity masquerading as reliability. Some people, in their pursuit of dependability, become inflexible in ways that create different problems. They refuse to adjust commitments even when circumstances have genuinely changed, and adjustment would serve everyone. They prioritize technical delivery over the actual needs that drove the request. They meet the letter of their promises while missing the spirit entirely. True reliability isn't mechanical. It's responsive to reality while maintaining consistent standards. When circumstances change in ways that make an original commitment no longer make sense, the reliable response isn't to plow forward blindly. It's to communicate about whether the commitment should be modified. This requires distinguishing between changes that genuinely warrant adjustment and the constant temptation to revise commitments downward out of convenience. The test is whether the change serves the underlying purpose. If you committed to deliver a report by Thursday, and on Wednesday you discover information that would make the report significantly more valuable but requires another day, adjusting the timeline might be the right call. If you're just running behind and Thursday is inconvenient, that's not a legitimate reason to renegotiate. Protecting standards means maintaining your baseline while remaining adaptive about specifics. The baseline is your commitment to doing what you said, when you said, how you said. The adaptability is recognizing that sometimes what you said, when you said, or how you said requires revision to actually serve the goal everyone cares about. Finding this balance takes judgment. There's no formula that tells you when flexibility is warranted and when it's a slide toward unreliability. What helps is honesty with yourself and with others. When you're considering adjusting a commitment, examine your motivations clearly. Are you responding to genuine changed circumstances, or are you looking for an exit from something that's become difficult? The answer determines whether adjustment is appropriate or whether it's a rationalized failure. The work of becoming someone others rely on doesn't conclude with a triumphant finish line. There's no moment when you've achieved reliability permanently and can stop paying attention. Dependability is an ongoing practice, a set of behaviors maintained through continuous attention and occasional course correction. Difficult periods will test what you've built. Some of those tests will reveal weaknesses you didn't know existed. Others will confirm that your systems and preparations hold up under pressure. Both outcomes provide useful information. The weaknesses that surface show you where additional work is needed. The strengths that emerge show you what's working and worth protecting. What grows from this sustained practice is something that can't be faked or rushed. A genuine reputation as someone whose word means something. People who have built this reputation carry it with them into every interaction. Their commitments are taken seriously because history has proven them trustworthy. Their requests for flexibility are granted readily because they've demonstrated they won't abuse it. Their relationships operate on a foundation of mutual confidence rather than cautious skepticism. You become someone others rely on not through declaration or intention, but through accumulated evidence. Each kept commitment adds to that evidence. Each recovered failure demonstrates your resilience. Each instance of early communication shows your respect for others' needs. Over months and years, this evidence builds into something solid, a track record that speaks for itself, and a self-concept that guides your behavior even when no one is watching.